Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf Samach Vav focuses primarily on the halacha of bitul rishos, but first it begins with schiras rishos. So let's again remind ourselves what these three things are. Whenever you have a number of people joined in ownership of an area, even though midaraisa rishos hayachid, Chazal considered it to be rishos harabim midirabanan, and they forbade people carrying within it, or from another area to it, or from it to another area. So any jointly owned area is a problem to carry there. The only way out of it is to make it a non-jointly owned area. There are three ways of doing that. One is an erev chatzeres shetufim mavais. That's everybody gets together and joins in one corporation which owns the area. That is something which only Jews can do together. If one of the Jews doesn't do it, then it is no longer a one corporation that owns everything. There are at least two interests in that joined area, that joined chutzner or mavai, whatever it is, and therefore it becomes forbidden for everybody that owns part of it or is involved to carry within the area or to or from the area. Now, that's eruv chatzeres and shetufim mavais. There is another solution that if that one person forgot to join the eruv or the shituf, then he can do what's called bitul rishos. That is, he can relinquish his rights in this yard, in this chutzner, in this mavai. Then he no longer has permission. That means that the conglomerate, the corporation exists. He had rights. In addition, he's relinquished his rights, and therefore he is no longer a joint owner. It's owned only by everybody else in a joint single corporation ownership, and therefore it's okay. Relinquishing one's rights can be done on Shabbos itself. As a matter of fact, that is a special procedure that was created by Chazal for a situation in which somebody is preventing other people from being able to carry. There's joint ownership of a yard. Chazal said you can relinquish your rights on Shabbos if you forgot to be part of the Erev before Shabbos. Now this halacha of bitul rishos is going to be the primary focus of the second half of the daf, and it's only created for a situation in which one person or few people are causing problems to the group in a shared area. If, however, you have two chatzeros that they want to make an erev chatzeros between them so that they can carry from one to the other, there is no pressing need to permit that. Everybody can carry within their own area, and therefore we did not allow the leniencies of bitul rishos. Now the other concept is that of schiras rishos, because bitul rishos and erev do not work for a non-Jew, they don't work for a nachri, for an idol worshipper, and therefore the only way to allow a use of joint areas where one of the owners is a idol worshipper is to do schiras rishos, and that is that we rent part of the rights that idol worshipper has in the yard, and therefore we would be allowed to carry within that area. Now the Gemara has just discussed a case where a number of chachamim were staying in an inn, and the innkeeper was a idol worshipper, and he was away, but he came back on Shabbos itself. And the question is, can you do schiras rishos from him on Shabbos? We know that you can't make an eruv chatzeros before Shabbos. That has to be done on Shabbos. That has to be done before Shabbos. You could, however, do bitul rishos, as we said, on Shabbos. The question is, where does schiras rishos fall? Could you do that on Shabbos, or does it have to be done before Shabbos? So what they did is they did it on Shabbos, even though it was now Shabbos. They did go ahead and they made a schiras rishos, and they went and asked Rav Yochanan, and Rav Yochanan said, you did good. So the Gemara says in Nahar, they were surprised by this. Did Rav Yochanan really say that you did good, that you could do schiras rishos on Shabbos? But we have a statement of Rav Yochanan where he says that schiras rishos is just like eruv. So that would seem to indicate that schiras rishos has to be done before Shabbos, just like an eruv has to be made before Shabbos. The Gemara says, no, that is not what was meant by that. When Rav Yochanan said that schiras rishos is like eruv, he meant that it has the leniencies of an eruv. That is the following halachas. That is to say that just like an eruv can be accomplished with bread worth less than a shavar pruta, schiras rishos also could be an amount less than a shavar pruta. Just like an eruv can be performed by a worker who has residence in his boss's land. That is, if a Jew is a worker in a property, then he can join the eruv, and that counts as if the entire property joined the eruv. He represents the other people in that property, or the owner. It's the same thing applies to schiras rishos. You could rent permission from a worker who has lodging rights in his boss's property. You do not have to get schiras rishos from the actual homeowner himself. Another way in which halachas is similar is that just like as far as making an eruv, one person can represent a group. Let's say you have a number of people in one chutzner and a number of people in another chutzner. They want to make an eruv together. One person can represent his entire chutzner and join the eruv on behalf of everybody else. Same thing applies to Schiras Rishus. If you have a number of people living together in one property, one person can rent out permission, or as far as the chutzner, one person in the chutzner, and this is how Rashi learns it, one person in the chutzner can rent from the idol worshiper who has residence there on behalf of everybody else. You don't have to have everybody else do a separate renting for it. Okay, so therefore Rabbi Yochanan never really said that you have to do Schiras Rishos from before Shabbos. So now the Gemara goes back to this case, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar was thinking about this halacha very carefully. And the Gemara says, what was he thinking about so carefully? Rabbi Zera asked, what was he thinking about? What was bothering him about it? So Rabbi Shesha says, how does a great man like Rabbi Zera not know what was bothering him about it? What was bothering Rabbi Elazar about it was that his Rebbe, Shmuel, said halacha, which seems to contradict this. And how could this halacha take place, this halacha that you're allowed to rent on Shabbos itself? What was the statement of Shmuel? Shmuel said that the halacha of whether you're allowed to do bittul rishos or not depends on two factors. It depends on oisun and it depends on ma'arvin. That means it depends on, you have a situation where you have people that aser each other, that if there is no erev chatzeres set up, the fact that they are both part of the same chatzar or the same joint rishus makes it forbidden for them to carry there without an erev chatzeres. Also, that an erev ma'arvin, that an erev chatzeres or shitufim avos works. So it's got to be that they aser each other without an erev, and an erev does work. Only in a case like that can you do bittul rishus. If either of those factors doesn't apply, then you can't do bittul rishus. Shmuel says three cases here where you have both, it works, both factors work. You have missing either one, it doesn't work. What are the three cases he's referring to? So the case where you have both Oisrin and Ma'arvin, that's where you have two courtyards, two chateras, one within the other. That means that in order for the inner courtyard to get to the Rishos Harabim, it has to walk through the outer yard. It means that the people in the inner yard have rights of passage through the outer yard. That right of passage is considered like they have residence. They have certain rights in the outer yard, and therefore, if they don't join the Erev Chatzeres of the outer yard, they aser the people of the outer yard from being able to carry within their yard. That's called Oisrin. However, they could join and make an Erev, and therefore it's Ma'arvin. That's Oisrin and Ma'arvin, and therefore in a situation like that, those people from the inner yard could do Bittul Rishos. Now, this case is not involved in the Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and the Chacham, which we saw earlier. Here we're referring to where the people on the inner yard did not make their own eruv, and therefore everybody would agree that they have rights to walk through the outer yard, and therefore they would aster the outer yard, and they could join the eruv of the outer yard. Now, that's that case. Now, what's a case where two yards could make an eruv, but they don't aster each other? That's if you have two yards side by side. They each have their own separate entrance to Rishos Harabim. Nobody needs to walk through anybody else, but they do have a doorway between them, and they want to be able to carry from one yard to the other yard. And they could do that if they make an Erev Chatzeres, but if one of them decides not to make an Erev Chatzeres, it doesn't affect the rights of the other one. They each have their own rights, and that yard can make its own Erev Chatzeres. They do not need the neighboring yard to join with them. So that's called Ma'arvin Ve'ein Oisur. In a situation like that, you cannot do Bittul Rishos. Chazal did not allow Bittul Rishos in a situation where it's not necessary, where it's not extremely important, because the people aren't allowed to carry within their own yard because of it. Here, if one of the yards forgot to do an Erev and he wants to do Bittul Rishos on Shabbos and say, I'm mevatel my rights, and therefore the other yard is allowed to use my land, my yard, and therefore they could carry within my yard, that it doesn't apply. There is no heter of Bittul Rishos in a situation where it's not so important, where nobody's being aser. That's from the second halacha. And the third halacha is a case where it's aser but ein ma'arvin. What's a situation where somebody asers but you can't make an Erev? That's a guy. You have a guy who lives in the yard. He makes it usher for everybody else to make an Erev Chatzeres in the yard, and you cannot make an Erev Chatzeres with him. You can't join him in an Erev Chatzeres. The guy is not allowed to be joined within an Erev Chatzeres. So, what is this case where there's a guy there, he can't make an Erev Chatzeres, and we say that he asers, and Shmuel says on that, you can't do Bittul Rishos. The guy cannot be mevatel his Rishos and allow people to carry on Shabbos. If this situation was where we're discussing before Shabbos, and they're coming to say, can you do Bittul Rishos or not? So then why would we even be discussing it? You could do Schiras Rishus before Shabbos. Bittul Rishus is not something that works on before Shabbos. Obviously, we're talking about where they came on Shabbos. They came on Shabbos, and it's saying that you can't do Schiras Rishus on Shabbos, and Shmuel is even adding that you can't do Bittul Rishus on Shabbos. So you see clearly against Rabbi Yochanan's halacha, you can't do Schiras Rishus, you can't do Bittul Rishus on Shabbos itself, even if the guy showed up on Shabbos. So that seems to go against Rabbi Yochanan's halacha, and that's what Rabbi Elazar was thinking about based on Shmuel's halacha. Okay, now, back to this sugya over here. Rabbi Yosef said, I never heard this halacha. Which halacha is he referring to? Rashi explains he's referring to the halacha of 1 yard within the other yard, where the inner yard has rights to walk through the outer yard to get to Rosh Hashanah. Shmuel had said that the halacha over there is that the people in the inner yard are considered to be residents of the outer yard, and therefore they aser, and they can make an erev, but the people in the outer yard cannot make they cannot carry within their yard unless they join those of the inner yard in an erev chatzera. So Rabbi Yosef said, I never heard that halacha. The people in the inner yard, their rights of passage makes it forbidden for those in the outer yard to carry in their own yard just because somebody has rights of passage through their yard unless they join the erev. Never heard of such a thing. Abai says, not only did you hear of it, but you taught it to us, and you taught us other things as well. Now, this was a common conversation. Rabbi Yosef became ill in his old age, and he forgot a lot of his learning, and Abai was reminding him a lot of the things that he said. Now, what happens here is the Gemara will focus on very strongly on this idea of people in 2 separate yards making a bittul rishus between them. So again, what we've seen so far is that if the 2 yards do not need each other, they each have their separate entrance to Rishus Harabim, Chazal did not allow Bittul Rishus in a case like that. Let's say they decide on Shabbos, one of the yards wants to carry through the other yard, wants to carry into the other yard, but there's no Erev. So they say, you know what, we'll do Bittul Rishus. Those who have that yard will relinquish their rights in their own yard, so that the people in the neighboring yard could carry there. So the Chazal did not allow that. Bittul Rishus is not allowed in a situation where neither needs to pass through the other one. Question is, and this is what we're discussing now, what happens if the inner yard, there's an inner yard and an outer yard, and the people in the inner yard need to pass through the outer yard, and they have rights to pass through the outer yard? In a situation like that, do we allow Bittul Rishus or not? Is that called separate yards, and therefore we don't allow Bittul Rishus? Or is that called joint yards, because the people from the inner yard do have rights in the outer yards? Is that called joint ownership in the outer yard, and therefore we do allow Bittul Rishus? So Shmuel has said yes, that's called outer, that is called that they live there, and we do allow Bittul Rishus in a case like that. Abaye filled this all in for Rav Yosef. He said, when did Shmuel say that you cannot do Bittul Rishus between 2 yards from 1 yard to another yard? That's only where each yard has its own entrance to Rishus Harabim, and therefore they don't have to pass through each other. However, in a situation like this where they do have rights to pass through and they have to pass through, that's considered to be 1 yard, and therefore we do allow Bittul Rishus if they forgot to do an Erev Chatzeros beforehand. And Shmuel also adds halacha that if there's a chorva between 2 yards, that is a destroyed house, and both yards are sharing usage of that destroyed house, we allow Bittul Rishus on that chorva as well, because again it's shared usage. Now, Rav Yosef asked, how could this be possible that Shmuel would say that? Shmuel has said that we always follow the language of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah said Bittul Rishus is only Anshe Chotzer, people joined in 1 yard, not people from 2 separate yards. 2 separate yards can never do Bittul Rishus. The concept is only yard where you can do Bittul Rishus, not yards, people of separate yards. Even if one is inside the other one and those people have to pass through the outer one to get through, Shmuel should still say, the language of the Mishnah says you can only do Bittul Rishus within 1 yard and not separate yards. So Abaye told Rav Yosef, no, that which Shmuel said that you have to stick to the language of the Mishnah is not referring to this halacha. That's referring to the halacha that the way we define a mavoi is if it has 2 yards in it, just like the way we define a house is if it has 2 houses opening into it. A mavoi and a chatzar are parallel in that way. Okay, the Gemara now fills in a machlokes here between Shmuel and Rav Yochanan about when you can do Bittul Rishus. So Rav Yochanan actually holds that you could do Bittul Rishus even between 2 separate yards. If 2 neighboring yards that don't need to pass through each other, you could do Bittul Rishus. And if you have a chorva between 2 yards where they both share usage of the chorva, you could also do Bittul Rishus. In both cases, Shmuel says you can't do Bittul Rishus. Not like we said earlier that the chorva you could. Shmuel says even in chorva you cannot do Bitul Rishos. Now the Gemara says, why do I need both these cases to be discussed? The Gemara says the Chorva is shared, and therefore I may think that Shmuel agrees if it wouldn't be spelled out that he argues, and he says that in Chorva you can't do Bitul Rishos. I may think that you could, because it is shared between the two houses. They don't need it. It's not their yard, but it is something that they're both using. So I would think that Shmuel says that you could do Bitul Rishos there, since it is shared and they both want to be able to use the Chorva. Therefore, I need you to tell me that there was a machlokas there, and if you'd only discussed that case, I wouldn't know that Rav Yochanan argues even on the case of 2 yards, 2 neighboring yards that don't need to pass through each other. Shmuel says that Rav Yochanan says that you're allowed to do Bitul Rishos there as well. I wouldn't know that, and therefore I need you to tell me both cases. Now, Gemara now brings Rava. Rava disagrees with Shmuel's assessment. Rava says even if you have 2 yards, one within the other, you do not consider the inner yard to be part of the outer yard to the extent that you could do Bitul Rishos. You consider them 2 separate yards, and you cannot do Bitul Rishos. However, you do consider them to be 1 yard to the extent that you can't be Mevatel Rishos to only your yard and not the other one. Meaning, if you make an Eruv between them, if all the yards, the inner yard and the outer yard, make an Eruv, they're all joined in one corporation. And now, if somebody wants to do Bitul Rishos, he has to do Bitul Rishos to both yards. But he cannot do Bitul Rishos to the other yard that he's not part of, because he's not considered to be part of that yard. Rava therefore ends up holding the following thing. He holds if you have an inner yard and an outer yard, and you make an Erev Chatzeres between them, and somebody forgot to join the Erev Chatzeres, that person has to do Bitul Rishos. He cannot do Bitul Rishos to a yard which is not his own, because that's considered to be a different yard. He does have to do Bitul Rishos because they join together in an Erev, and they're considered to be separate yards, such that if the Erev is in one yard, then the people of the other yard cannot use the Erev if they were to be mevatel themselves from it, to separate themselves out of that Erev. Therefore, you're going to end up in a situation that can't be fixed. So, Rava spells it out. He says, if you have the inner yard and the outer yard, and you put the Erev in the outer yard, there is no solution. There is no way that anybody could do Bitul Rishos if somebody forgot to join the Erev, that is. If somebody forgot to join it, doesn't matter which yard he lives in, he cannot do Bitul Rishos to the other yard because it's a separate yard. And Rava holds, not like Shmuel, you can't do Bitul Rishos to a separate yard. He can't do Bitul Rishos to his own yard, for separate reasons. He can't do he has to do a Bitul Rishos to both yards, and he can't because they're joined in an Erev. He has to be Mevatel Rishos to all of them, and he can't because they're separate yards. Doing a Bitul Rishos to just his own yard wouldn't help. The only scenario in which you have some kind of solution is if the Erev is placed in the inner yard and somebody in the outer yard forgot to join the Erev. Then what you could theoretically do is you could say that the people in the inner yard can close the gate between the yards. Now there is no longer any passage between yards. Nobody has to go from any yard to another yard, and there is no right of passage of all. The people in the inner yard withdraw from the outer yard. They say, we're not going to outer yard. We withdraw our rights to the outer yard. We have our own Erev Chatzeres here in our own yard. And therefore we can join together here, and we can exclude that guy in the outer yard who forgot to be part of the Erev Chatzeres. We don't need him to do Bitul Rishos. We have our own Erev. We're here together. We're excluding those guys. We're locking the gate, and they're not part of us. If it's the other way, though, if the Erev is in the outer yard, they can't do that because they don't have an Erev with them, and they also can't. The outer people can't just lock the gate because the inner people have to get out. So, in wherever the Erev is placed, and wherever there is somebody who forgot to join the Erev, the only case where you have a solution to solve the problem is that one, where the person who forgot to join is in the outer yard, and the Erev is in the inner yard. Notes that this is only true, not like the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds that when somebody is mevatel as Rishos, it doesn't have to be mevatel to everybody who joined the Erev. He could just be mevatel to the people of his yard. Therefore, if the person who forgot is in the inner yard, and the Eruv is in the inner yard, you should theoretically be able to get out of the problem. He could be Mavatal B'Shus to the people in the inner yard where he lives, and forget about the people in the outer yard. It doesn't have to be Mavatal B'Shus to them. But Rava is not going like that. Halacha Rava is assuming that everybody who joined the Eruv has to be able to accept this Rishus that is being Mavatoled, and therefore this solution would not work. The people in the outer yard have to be able to accept it, and they can't, because you can't be Mavatal B'Shus from one yard to another yard.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.